Hi everyone, welcome to this interview by Core Recruitment. Thank you very much for joining us today. Core has been running our webinar series now since last March, which is coming up on 13 months now, which is quite an achievement within itself. I don't think anyone expected COVID to be going on that long, but here we are. As part of our March interviews this year, we are obviously celebrating International Women's Day and International Women's Month. And as such, we are interviewing some key figures and leaders from the sector. And there's nobody who is more from the sector than Kate Nicholls. So I'm really pleased to say welcome to Kate today, and thank you so much for agreeing to be interviewed, Kate. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for having me at the end of a fantastic month.
Thank you very much for being here. So, Kate, I guess for anyone who has not read any newsletter or seen any information, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Well, I'm Chief Executive at UKHOSPITALITY, which is the national trade body for hospitality operators and employers, which was created about 3 years ago when we merged a number of the trade associations in the sector. Prior to that, I headed up the ALMR, which was the trade body for pubs, bars, restaurants. So for the last 10 years, I've probably been involved in the membership trade bodies and campaigning trade bodies in the hospitality sector. Prior to that, my background is in politics, it's in advising at a corporate level, a number of companies, trade associations, membership organisations in the hospitality space, and then going right back was working in the House of Commons in the European Parliament. So I've always been able to combine campaigning, politics, strategic advice and hospitality, which is where I've made my career.
Thank you. And if you could just give us, COVID's had a lot of airtime already, so if you can just maybe give us 60 seconds on how COVID's affected you and how COVID's affected your organisation, that would be great.
Well, COVID has really dominated my life for the last 14 months. So I first started talking to government about the impact of COVID. 28th of January last year was when I had my first meeting, which was when we had the identification that it had broken out of Wuhan, it was in Beijing, and then it was a when did it arrive in the West, not if. I don't think anybody at the time expected it to be all-consuming, but it has dominated my life 24/7 since that date. That's all I've worked on, occasionally a little bit of trade and a little bit of Brexit. But it's devastated the hospitality and tourism sector. We are now just a third the size we were at the start of the lockdown in terms of revenue. We've lost 660,000 employees across the sector, so the headcount is down, the hours are down. We've lost 12,000 premises. So really a sort of devastating year where we've had to, for my team, we've had to work flat out to be able to support those businesses across the sector that have been clinging on by their fingertips, trying to get the right support from government, trying to get the right policies from government to get the sector open, to rebuild resilience, to move in towards recovery, and to try and look ahead at how we can help the economy as a whole and society as a whole come out of what has been a devastating crisis.
Absolutely. I think I speak on behalf of the whole sector when I just say massive thank you for the whole effort, Kate, and also how much of a good job you've been doing with representing hospitality at government level as well. I think that's been amazing. Coming on to the topic at hand today, though, is obviously International Women's Day, International Women's Month. If you can just tell us a little bit about what that means to you.
I always think International Women's Day, it's a really important day in the calendar, and I think it's vital that we extend it to a month so that we raise that awareness. It is a moment in time where we look at celebrating how far we've come, acknowledging how much more needs to be done, and identifying the role models across society and across all walks of life, really, from the women in our own personal lives who do so much for us to the women in business and the female leaders. You need those role models at every point in life to be able to inspire the next generation. And I think it's that sort of forward and backward looking of how can we change the nature of the debate? How can we continue to improve? How can we continue to strive to promote diversity and inclusivity? Because there is still a need to do that. We don't have that equal representation. We don't have equal pay. We do still have many challenges that need to be overcome. And also, how can we help those who are coming behind us to deal with the challenges that we faced in the past and overcome. And my motto always, when we did Plan B mentoring and the other initiatives that we've done at UK Hospitality, is lift as you climb. And I think International Women's Day is that moment when every single one of us as women can celebrate everything that we've achieved, but also help those who are coming behind us to get further on and to get further ahead.
Absolutely. Regarding the gender pay gap, how would you sum up the kind of cultural issues that form the background of it?
Well, I think, gender pay gap is one of those areas where, despite all the initiatives that we've done, we still have that struggle. And I think you're right to identify it as being slightly a cultural issue. If we look at hospitality, we are better than the rest of the economy at tackling this issue because we have a very diverse workforce in the bulk of the estate, and particularly those who are working in sites. And we are the ultimate meritocracy. So our diversity, our inclusivity, our equal pay works for us to the advantage of the bulk of our members of staff. The challenge we've got at hospitality is that once you get to the level below C-suite and C-suite, diversity and inclusivity declines dramatically, and still for so many companies it is still quite male dominated. So you do get a gender pay gap, not because we treat people unfairly throughout the bulk of the workforce, and not that we treat people unfairly for the same work done at the same level, but just because we've still got work to do to get more women up to C-suite levels and the level below C-suite. And I think culturally across the UK, and leaving aside just hospitality, there is still a lack of value and a lack of appreciation of the skills that people take when they have a career break, particularly around maternity leave and bringing up young children. And inevitably, you do have more of that responsibility falling on women. And unless culturally we recognize the skills that you develop while you're doing that, you don't then come back in at the same level or same rate. And so culturally, we need to work to overcome that. And obviously then, gender pay gap will solve itself slightly when we get more women into those senior levels.
Absolutely. And there's lots of companies that we're hearing from at the moment that are talking about using quota systems, and these are maybe less popular in the UK than they are in other countries, but there definitely seems to be more companies talking about this. What's your view on quota systems?
Well, personally, I'm never in favour of them, but that might just be because I've sort of got that reverse chip on my shoulder, having been subject to some of the quota systems. So when I went to university, I came from a state school, and I went to Cambridge, and they had a quota of the proportion of people in that college that they wanted to have that was female and came from state comprehensives. And so you do tend to have that nagging sense of self-doubt that perhaps you're only there because you're part of a quota. You do get that casual sexism that permeates throughout society and permeates throughout the economy, that, you're only on the board because you're a woman and they need to have quotas. So personally, I've never been in favour of that, because it needs to have that culture change that goes alongside it. In and of itself, a quota won't solve anything if you're dealing with inequality or a lack of diversity. However, I can see that it's helpful to have that target and that aspiration, and for larger companies and institutions in particular to be able to reflect and take a look at itself. I think it needs to go beyond gender. It does need to look at diversity and inclusivity more broadly, but to have that quota, that target, that aspiration does force you to look at what is happening throughout the rest of the organisation that is not letting you see that talent come through.
Absolutely. Regarding the negative stereotypes of feminism, what's the most effective way to counteract these from a workplace perspective?
I think you need to change language. I think the negative stereotypes around feminism is all around how do you describe those women who get to the top. And you will always have a woman described as competitive, ambitious, in a negative connotation for behavior that would go unnoticed by a man in the same route. And so we need to make sure that we consciously strip that out of descriptions. If you're going to get to the top, if you are going to be a leader, there is a degree of toughness that goes alongside that, and you are paid to make those difficult decisions. we need to stop looking at that particularly pejoratively when we describe the women. And you'll get that coming through time and time again in the way male leaders are described. You never get that same language. So I do think language really, really matters there. And I do think you need to work then on unconscious bias. So much of what you do that you're coming through with a feminist approach, or where you're seeing feminism negatively, is an unconscious bias on the part of the men in the organization who perhaps are seeing it only in one way. And feminism to me is about equal treatment. That's all it is. There is no way that anybody should or could be able to object to it. And everybody should be able to describe themselves as a feminist within that organization. And if you don't believe in equal rights for half the population, then you need to go and have a long, hard look at yourself.
Absolutely. Are there any situations or jobs or anything that you've been in previously, Kate, where you felt that you have been treated unfairly?
Yes, usually in sort of interview situations or progression situations. I mean, I've always worked in a very heavily male-dominated environment. So my earliest work was in the House of Commons, the European Parliament. Women representation in those political institutions is very low. It's also lower in the civil service. So, you know, even today, where it's much better, it's about 30% female. So it's not balanced. When I was there, it was probably about 10%. And as I say, I went to Cambridge. So, you know, again, you do have that split. Cambridge in the 90s, many more men than there were women. So I worked in politics. I then went to work for Whitbread in hospitality. And again, hospitality, very male dominated. I remember organizing the very first ALMR Christmas lunch, and you were literally waving at the other woman across the room out of 800. You know, it's much more diverse now, but you know, there were not very many females there. And also I worked in public affairs agency. And again, in public affairs agency, because it's aligned to politics, you had, we had an agency, one of the biggest agencies was about 40 people. You had one female director, which was myself, an account director. You had very few women in the organization. So I've always worked in that situation. And then when I worked for Whitbread, you know, obviously 23, going in, and my role was to advise the boards of all the Whitbread groups about politics and political change that was coming through. So I think you have to work hard to prove yourself when you are young and in a responsible position, and when you're female as well, to be able to be taken seriously. But then higher up in my career, you know, I have had those kind of assumptions that are made, you know, in an interview environment. Who's going to supervise the children's homework? I hope you're asking the male who's a candidate for a job, who's going to do that? Because my answer was, it's none of your business how I organize my personal life. But, you know, that kind of subliminal messaging when you're dealing with a lot of people where their wives don't go out to work, the wife is the person who is organizing the home life. How, you know, it came from a good place. How do you make sure you've got a good work-life balance? But you can't ask those sort of things. And so I suppose it's just that that sort of perception that goes alongside it. And you know, I have been tagged as being competitive, ambitious, and it's sort of like, well, I'm not a competitive person. You are wrongly attributing a sort of characteristic to me, because you're seeing somebody who knows what they want, is determined, knows how to get what they want, and is just delivering on that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Wow. So despite legislation being in place, why do you think we haven't achieved equality when it comes to pay?
I think because you've got that. Well, first of all, I think there is a difference between looking at two jobs, same candidates, same qualifications, same pay levels. I do think you do get that by and large if they are identical. What we've got is a disparity between pay gaps, because you've got, you know, sort of more men in senior positions, and you're not getting that coming through, and that's reflected in the gender pay gap. But some of it, I think, as I say, is cultural. You know, the women in the workplace do tend to take more of a career break for family, and that if that's not valued, they can come back in at a lower level, or their pay is not reflected. And I think we do need to work harder to overcome those cultural stereotypes that suggest that there's less commitment, or that there's less investment in their career. and give people the opportunities. But I think we're working really hard, and I'm particularly pleased at the progress that's made in hospitality in tackling that at every level. And I think, there's a lot of industrial sectors that could learn from hospitality about making sure that you don't have inequalities in pay.
Absolutely. Now, in terms of advice for younger women who are kind of like starting out in their careers, how would you suggest that they build their confidence and hone their abilities as a leader?
I think it's a bit of a chicken and an egg situation, because the best way to do that is to ask for support. I've always been surprised at how much younger women sit back and wait to be noticed, and you'll never get that when you've got men in the team. So if you're asking people, you as a leader, and I've done it myself, who would like some extra training, who feels that they would like X, Y, and Z, which course would you like to go on, you will always get the men stepping up to the plate and saying they would like it, they would like the training, they'd like to be mentored. They don't even wait to be asked. They come and tell you that they've spotted this, they'd like this, and they'll ask for mentoring. And I think women sit back and wait to be noticed. So I think we as leaders need to do more to help those young women, to ask them, do they want this? Would they like that? To offer them that suite of options, and to recognize among ourselves that they will tend to sit back. Not everybody, and I don't want to stereotype everybody, but it's much more likely that women will sit to wait to be noticed for that promotion, for that opportunity, for that ability to work on the big project. And so as leaders, we need to be enablers, and we need to support them, and we need to push. And I think, then the advice to the young women, it is a bit of a lean in. Ask for some mentoring, ask for some support. Please don't be afraid to. And I think that's something that does hold a lot of people back. It's not just women, but people assume that if they're asking for help, or they're asking to be developed in a certain area, that it's seen as somehow a type of weakness. And I think, just creating that collaborative atmosphere where you can feel comfortable in asking for that support is the best way to build confidence.
Absolutely. I think you've answered a bit of the next question of this, but what initiatives do you think companies should be putting in place to promote women in leadership?
I think you do need mentoring, and it needs to be proactive. Mentoring, in my experience of just sitting back and observing, it happens informally to so many men. For whatever reason, and if you're outside of that group, you're not doing it deliberately, but you just don't spot it. So a lot of mentoring in business happens informally, when people go to the pub after work, when they go out, or they play golf, or they do whatever. If you are a woman of a certain age, often the last thing you want to do is go out for a drink after work, and you need to be conscious of that, because a lot of them go home to look after children. And I've done it myself, where I know I've missed out on opportunities because I just don't want to be in the pub at 6, 7 o'clock at night. So a lot of that happens informally. So I think a lot of companies should work harder at having proactive mentoring schemes, identifying and going out to those people, and sort of saying, and it's a different way to make sure you get the buy-in. I think you have leadership potential, needs to be said explicitly to a lot of women. And I would like to help you get there, and I'd like to help you make the most of yourself. And that needs to be part of it. So that was the driving force behind the Plan B mentoring scheme that we helped work on, or I helped work on with other women in the sector. Anne Elliott, Emma Causer, and Holly Addison was just to provide that easy get in for mentoring, which a lot of companies either don't have formally, or women feel less comfortable asking for.
I think that's really, really excellent advice. I've been kicking around the industry now for about 15 years, Kate, and I've seen you speak kind of at numerous different events. But there's one that really stands out to me, and it was when everybody thought Brexit was the worst thing in the world. And there was a date that had been organised, I think it was an arena dinner, and it was at the Savoy. And I think the date for Brexit, or the date for something, had been changed. I can't even remember what it was, and at the time it seemed so important then, but it's not now. But the date had been changed, and you were due to speak, and I saw you just before you went up on stage, and you were absolutely covered with flu. It was March last year, so it was 2 years ago, so it wasn't anything else. But you were literally covered. You could barely even speak properly. And I saw you before you walked up on stage, and you literally kind of shook yourself and gave yourself like a little sharp breath in. And so you walk up on stage and you absolutely delivered in front of 300 people who were all shouting at you about Brexit and what we're going to do, and it's a mess and all of that kind of stuff. And I was just absolutely so impressed about how professionally you conducted yourself for that whole thing, and you didn't at once kind of like let your guard down or drop or anything like that. And I just thought, wow, that is incredibly powerful, especially when somebody feels like crap. It would have been a great performance anytime. But what motivates you? What gives you this kind of inner core, this inner strength to kind of like push on like that?
Well, part of it is because I'm there as the voice and the face of my team. So largely what motivates me is not letting people down. You know, sort of that goes throughout my career, and that, you know, that's what I'm trying to do all the time. So if I'm at an event like that, my team will have prepped me, my team will have sorted out all of the stuff that I'm going to say. They craft the bullets, I fire them. So I want to do a good performance, if you like, for them. And I also want to make sure that I'm doing a good job for the event organisers who have asked me to come there and you know, have got people paying money to sit and listen. But also I want to do the right thing for the industry. And so, you know, I'm really passionate about what I do. I don't think I could be a lobbyist for a widget manufacturer or a, you know, tobacco manufacturer or any of those kind of things. I am passionate about hospitality. I want to do the right thing for the businesses within the sector and for the people that they employ. And therefore I want to make sure that we're communicating as effectively as we can. And also, despite having done it lots and lots of times, I do get incredibly nervous before I go up and do any speech, which is why I do the little shake myself and get yourself mentally in the space and then go and deliver. So it's all of those kind of things, really.
Well, it's not coming across at all. And if you could go back and whisper in like the ear of your kind of 14-year-old self and kind of give yourself some advice, what would that advice be?
That you can go easy on yourself. That you know, you don't need to beat yourself up so much. You don't need to be as hard on yourself. That everybody feels imposter syndrome to a greater or lesser extent. And I think it took me until I was in my mid-30s before I finally got over imposter syndrome. I mean, probably it took me having children and becoming a mum to realize that you know, in my professional life, I didn't need to worry about imposter syndrome. And I think just knowing that everybody else feels the same way is probably the best advice I would give to my 14-year-old self.
Well, and did you ever imagine to your 14-year-old self that you might one day receive an OBE? Because that must have been a massive achievement.
No. I mean, that was just, yeah, I was really humbled, really proud. You know, if I look back at where I came from and my family, my background, my school, to think that I would be going to get an OBE or be on the national news, I would have just been blown away. And I was incredibly proud to get that on behalf of the whole sector. And you know, the OBE was for work during COVID. So I do feel as though it's the sector's award. It's an acknowledgement of what the sector has gone through, and to get that on behalf of all of those people who put their faith in me to represent their voice in government. Hugely proud to achieve it.
Absolutely, congratulations. And last question for today, Kate, in terms of like the women who have supported you in your career or who have inspired you, either from industry, outside of industry, within the media, who do you get your motivation from? Who do you look up to?
Well, my big role model when I was younger, going back to my 14-year-old self and where was I going to go and what was I going to try and do, was Kate Nicholls. I mean, she was my model and inspiration. I was dead set. I was going to be a journalist. That's what I was going to do. And the fact that she came from Sunderland and, you know, that working class northeastern girl who could be on the BBC, especially at a time when you were told that you had to lose your northern accent if you wanted to get on. You know, she was a big role model and somebody that I looked up to. I was hugely fortunate in my early career that the Euro MP that I worked for, Caroline Jackson, again, one of the few women in that political environment, but she was one of those people who got you and said, right, you need to do X, Y, and Z. You are not busy enough working in Brussels and Strasbourg, so you need to go and work in the House of Commons. For your career, you need to go and do this. Let's set up this. And gave you that push and that confidence that you could do an awful lot, and that what you were saying was worthwhile, and that people could listen to you. And then going through, you know, the industry, I've been hugely fortunate to have a lot of strong women who've been supportive and helped me along the way, or given encouragement. People like Gillian McLean, Sue Cacioppo, you know, Anne Elliott, who I've worked with, who've sort of done that encouragement and yes, you can do it. And have been very supportive in sending little notes whenever anything happens. You know, yes, that was great. You did really well. Well done, you. But I actually would have to say, and this goes back to my point about mentoring, and the Plan B scheme we had. You need really strong champions. You don't just need women champions, and you need the men to be behind you. And it's the men that are driving change. So you need as many people who are going to be mentors. You don't just need the women, you need the men to be the mentors, and you need the men to be the champions and the people who are shouting up for you and saying, this is a future leader and we need to invest in her. And so, you know, equally as much as all of that, you know, people like Simon Ward, who was my boss at Whitbread, fantastic, you know, the most supportive person that I could possibly have asked for. Hugely fortunate that at the start of my career I had somebody like him who would encourage, enable, give the projects, do all of those kind of things.
Excellent. Kate, I think that's been an excellent 25 minutes. Thank you so much for taking the time to have a chat with us. Thank you so much once again on behalf of us and the industry as well for all the work you've done. I think you're a real inspiration. So thanks very much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.